to go ahead and launch into this, and hopefully my little clicker and everything work. So my name is Shannon Goins, and I am a LANA certified lymphedema therapist. The LANA part is it's like a special optional thing you can get to prove that you've learned a whole lot of things. It doesn't mean much to anybody except certified lymphedema therapists. But anyway, I'm also, in addition to that, a medical and myofascial licensed massage therapist. And then I also have an MA in international studies. I have almost a second MA in education and a BA in German. So that's sort of my background. My company is called Pain and Swelling Solutions, and I'm based out of Albuquerque, and I've been here since 2018. And I'd like to thank the Pink Warrior House for having me today to give this lecture. They said people want to know about fibrosis, so let's learn a little bit. So in order for me to talk about this, because this is a pretty challenging topic, there's a lot to know, even for somebody like me that does this for a living, to really understand it. It's a vast topic. So I want to make sure that we have the very basics down so that as I'm talking, you have a vocabulary to work with. So forgive me if you already know a lot of this, but that way I know that we're all on the same page. All right, so what exactly is lymph? Well, the lymph is basically a second circulatory system. So we all know the primary circulatory system, which is the heart, the arteries, and the veins. It's how blood gets around from the heart back to the heart. And the lymphatic system is, if you look at these two things parallel to each other, they almost look the same, and it's not by accident. So the circulatory system, the one that carries the blood, it's cyclical in nature. So it goes around in a circle. So the heart pumps the blood out through the arteries, and it's then taken up back to the veins and returned back to the heart, and is again pumped out through the arteries. So it's in a loop. The lymphatic system, by contrast, is a one-way system, and it lies, like hand in glove with the circulatory system, and they work together, and we're going to see how that happens. All right, let's talk very briefly about the functions of the lymphatic system. First of all, it serves as a highway for the immune system. It's how our immune cells get around and where they wage war. They actually wage war in our lymph nodes. It is responsible for our ability to absorb fat-soluble vitamins, and that happens in the intestines. It is responsible for fluid buildup removal, and it is also how we remove waste and proteins from our tissues. And so the two things of those four that we are most concerned with in the topic of fibrosis is fluid and waste removal. So, but I want to kind of briefly go over these other things. So the immune system highway. So we get a cut on our hand. There are bacteria on our hand. We have some immune cells. They want to get to this cut. The lymphatic system is the highway. They come in via the highway, and then they wage war. All right. These are lymph nodes. These are the things that you have like under your arms. You have them in your neck. We refer to them as, the glands are swollen. If you get sick, like if those bacteria get in, and you can think of lymph nodes kind of like a sieve or a colander that catch foreign bodies floating around in the lymph. And so they would, in this previous example, catch like bacteria. And that's why they swell up, because the immune cells come in and wage war there. The fat-soluble vitamin absorption happens in the intestines. We have about a total of 600 to 700 lymph nodes in our body, and about 300 to 400 of those reside in our intestines. So this is a huge job of the lymphatic system. But what we're really concerned about here is the waste and fluid removal. So let's delve into that. First, we need to know how cell waste is produced. So I have here a picture of someone that ate a cheeseburger. And it's gone through their stomach, and it's wound its way into their intestines, and it's been broken down from the big cheeseburger into tiny little cheeseburger bits. And these tiny little cheeseburger bits work their way through the intestine and eventually reach a blood vessel. And so that little cheeseburger is now near the blood vessel. And it gets taken up by the bloodstream. I know this gets really tiny and it's probably hard to see, but it gets taken up by the bloodstream, and then is transported through the bloodstream over to an area of the body. This could be anywhere, but for our example, let's pretend that what we're looking at here in the bottom right-hand corner with that little green stalk and the red and blue lines, we're going to pretend that's like the end of a finger. And so we've taken a little slice of the end of a finger, and we're looking at it under a microscope. So what you see there on the left-hand side, the blue, that is a vein that's returning blood to the heart. On the right is an artery that's taking blood away from the heart, and it is in this case carrying our little cheeseburger bit. All right. The green thing that we see, that green stalk at the bottom, is a lymphatic capillary, or capillary as many people call it. I use the British pronunciation, so please bear with me. Anyway, the lymphatic capillary is like the on-ramp to the lymphatic system. So this is how things are taken up from our cells and transported around. We're going to talk about that here more in depth. All right, so now I've zoomed in on that bottom picture. So we have our cheeseburger, and it's coming down through this artery, and I've got a little droplet of fluid, and that's to represent that the blood is liquid. And we all know that, but it's real important here in a second. So in between, and I didn't talk about the purple structures, in between the arteries and the veins are the capillaries for the bloodstream. And you can think of these things as a type of sprinkler hose, if you will. You know, if you turn on a sprinkler hose and it sprays out the water, right? That's kind of what the capillaries are like. So as this cheeseburger comes along through the capillaries, it is carried out by fluid over to the cells. And the cells are those little things, little round doohickeys that are in between here. I don't know if I can use my pointer. I can't. So anyway, the cheeseburger bit works its way out and goes over to the cell, and it's carried by fluid, and that cell gets it, it eats it, and it poops. All right. So now we are stuck in this space. Remember, this is somewhere like in the end of our finger, with some fluid and some cell poop. And that sounds kind of gross, but really what this is just like a protein, honestly. So then it is, under normal circumstances, what happens to it is the lymphatic capillary picks up both the cell waste, the protein, and it picks up the fluid, and it carries it away and gets it out of that tissue, so that the tissue is now no longer full of fluid and waste. It then travels along the lymphatic vessels. So like I said, we were talking about a fingertip. So here's a person, and you see in green the lymphatic vessels. So it's going to travel along those lymphatic vessels. And where does it go? Well, there comes our poop, and it ends up right there at the top of the heart. Those should be blue things coming out of the heart. Those are subclavian veins. Those are right at your collarbones. And that's where the lymphatic system terminates or dumps all of its contents. So fluid, cell waste, anything it's carrying goes back into the bloodstream. So that's where it ends up. Well, then what? So the liver then gets the blood from the heart that contains this fluid and this poop, and it breaks down the proteins. And then the kidneys eventually get this fluid and they pee it out. And so that's the end point of the fluid. All right, but what happens when we remove lymph nodes? So now we are talking about, we're going to do something to this perfectly functioning lymphatic system. So here are some lymph nodes in the armpit or axillary area, which are usually what they go after in cases of breast cancer. And so we are back on this diagram where we talked about how the fluid travels in this direction from the fingertip up to the axilla or armpit. The lymph nodes are here in the armpit. And then from there, the fluid travels up to the collarbone area to where it dumps into the subclavian veins. So if we have an interruption in that system, what happens initially is we get some swelling, just like if we were injured. For example, if you sprained your wrist or your ankle, it swells up. So, but in lymphedema, there's a whole lot more going on than just like a regular injury from swelling. All right. So in cases where lymph nodes have been removed, you can think of it as like an infrastructure collapse. So if we think of this in terms of traffic, we've had a bridge go out. Well, if we have a bridge go out, then inevitably we're going to run into, basically traffic that's congested. And over time, that traffic would build up and build up and build up and build up. And this is what is happening essentially in lymphedema. So we're back to this diagram again. And you can see here, we've got an X over the lymphatic capillary, meaning that, the system is clogged. It's not working. Something's hindering our normal process of removing this cell waste and fluid that's being constantly deposited. So, the cells are being fed, they're eating, they're pooping, and this fluid's delivering it, and it just gets stuck. So we refer to this, if it's a temporary thing, as edema. That means swelling, quite simply. But lymphedema is something a little bit different. Was somebody needing to talk to me? I think maybe somebody hopped on that had their microphone unmuted. Okay, so then so the same diagram, now you see that we've got quite a good deal of fluid. We've got poop and everything. And when it hangs out for a long time, so we've got extra fluid and extra poop, they actually cause tissue changes to occur. And so if you have like, you know, a swelling in your wrist or an ankle that was sprained, this doesn't happen because the swelling and the poop or the proteins, they get removed and, you know, in a reasonable period of time. But in lymphedema, this is still hindered. So we're now going to kind of look at what happens in the tissue changes. All right, so tissues are full of like a bunch of different types of cells. So in the little example that I've been using here on the left-hand side, I haven't really shown a bunch of cells. But these cells that are around, they do a lot of important jobs. And so I found a little, this is a picture. This isn't an actual picture of cells, but you could think of this as what's really going on in the tissues. You've got cells that do every possible thing you can imagine. So you've got tissues or cells that are, you know, building new tissue. You've got certain cells that are responsible to produce things like a glue that hold us together. You've got cells that provide an immune response to fight off invaders. And you've got cells that help to keep tissues hydrated so that we don't turn into dust. So all these are really important functions of the myriad types of cells that exist in just a little sliver of a finger. But in lymphedema, instead of doing those things, what happens is with all this waste and fluid buildup is we get something called an inflammatory cascade. And so here are the things that were on the last slide. So when we have, you know, healthy functioning normal lymphatic system, all these things like the tissue repair, the holding of cells together, the keeping the tissues hydrated and all these things, they're doing good things. But in an inflammatory cascade, when you have lymphedema, they become other things. They go haywire, as it were. So this is where it gets like into a lot of really complicated biochemistry and physiology. But in short, what happens is that, you know, where you had the cells that were building new tissue, if you had a damaged type of tissue, like you had a cut, for example, instead of doing that, they start building unnecessary amounts and types of tissues. So these things are no longer beneficial. They've become what we call pathological. So it's not normal tissue that it's building. The cells themselves, instead of just being held together like we should be held together, start to stick together abnormally. Our immune response then really kicks up. And this is one of the main drivers behind the fibrosis and why limbs start to change shape in a more permanent fashion. So a lot of this is immune response because we've got all of these proteins and not just the cell poop, right? So we talked about that. That's just what's being delivered constantly on a daily basis. But back up in that top list where things were working correctly, there are a lot of proteins that are responsible for different functions, like when I said that keep tissues hydrated. You guys have probably heard of hyaluronic acid, the stuff that women like to have injected to get rid of crow's feet and things of that nature. So that is one of the main types of components that exists in the tissues that then just goes haywire with this inflammatory response. So not only is it just keeping the tissues hydrated, it's hanging on to water, it really hangs on to water. So it's like overworking in chronic inflammation. And then just the other proteins that are in there, they aren't like just a minor magnet to pull water, they become super magnets. And so not only do you have a blocked system where you can't get the water out anymore, you have all these many types of proteins that are in there that are screaming, give me water, and starting to pull it in, and they won't let go. So this then becomes a big problem. So let's try and visualize this because there's a lot to talk about. So if we look at protein behavior under normal lymphatic functions, so you're getting, you know, the cheeseburgers delivered and the cells are eating and then they're pooping, and that's kind of, you know, protein. And then what does it look like? Well, you can imagine it like little round magnets. They're kind of spaced out a little bit, and they are mobile and they're free floating. They are then returned to the liver by the lymphatic system, where the liver breaks it down. We talked about that earlier. That's what happens when everything is going well. But if we look at what happens when the lymphatic system is impaired, then the protein stays in the tissue, as we said, and it can't be taken up because the lymphatic system has, you know, it has this roadblock or broken bridge, or however you want to envision it. And so they stick together. And then lots of proteins that are stuck together start to form structure. And this is what is called fibrosis. So this is the hard stuff that you can feel. And this sets in over time. And what makes this an even more complex thing, so we have the extra protein that's building structure, we've got the proteins that are attracting fluid, and then once the proteins have like all built up, it gets even more complicated. The fibrosis begins to attract fat cells. And so then we develop something called a fatty fibrosis. And this is what gives a limb a permanent shape that cannot be reduced. It can't be just simply massaged away at this point, because it's like there's a whole scaffolding system in there that's reinforced with fatty cells. All right, so where does this happen in the body? So, and this is going to be a picture of a chicken breast with the skin peeled off. So above this, or above the muscle and beneath the skin, there is this stuff called fascia. And that's what that little red arrow is pointing to. So if you guys have ever peeled skin off a chicken breast, you've seen this. This is where those changes are happening. And so it's not happening in the muscle, it happens in that connective tissue. And then it can eventually, if it's not controlled, actually affect the skin and its texture as well. So that's where it's transpiring. So what we end up with is something that I kind of refer to as the lymphedema snowball effect. So when you talk about the snowball effect, you've got something that's really small and then it gets bigger. You reach a point where it won't get back, and then boom, you're stuck with like, you know, something much bigger than you started with. So in terms of lymphedema, we start off with something small. So when people get lymphedema, we have what's called reversible swelling. Reversible swelling is when, you know, you start to get it, but you're not really sure. You just kind of like have a heaviness in your limb, like your arm just feels full. You can't see it, but you feel like it's there. You go to your doctor, they're like, nothing's going on, but it is there. And you can think of it kind of like a sponge. So, you know, a sponge doesn't change shape really when you put water in it. You know, you can squeeze it out, but it's still got that same shape. So initially, the swelling is just kind of sitting there, but it's not really visible. And if you elevate, a lot of times it'll go down. But if this process, like remember, we've got all these protein things going on in the background, you reach a point where it's called spontaneously irreversible swelling. And so that's a term that's kind of hard to understand. So spontaneously means that just one day it stops going down on its own if you elevate it. And that's because you've crossed a certain threshold. It just will not reduce on its own. And you end up then in the very end with the permanent tissue changes, when that, if it's not addressed, goes on and on and on. So, and what that looks like then, so on the far left, or sorry, yeah, on the far left, you see a lady who has on her left arm, you know, a very beginning stage of lymphedema. It's a little bit visible. Next lady over has got something that's a little bit more visible. And somewhere in that stage, in that second photo, is where it becomes spontaneously irreversible. You can't just get it to go down anymore. This is where the tissue changes begin, which then transitions you to the third slide there with the lady with the red shirt. And then if it's not dealt with, can actually deform the limb. And that's what you've got on the final slide with the lady with the sort of pattern shirt. So that's what that progression looks like. And all of this is due to the excess fluid, excess protein, the triggering of that inflammatory response, and then the tissue changes that result. So let's recap what we did, because I know this is a ton of information just being kind of thrown at you. So we have first an infrastructure collapse. So this was, the removal of the lymph nodes. That then leads to the fluid and protein backup. That leads to long-standing swelling, triggering an overreaction in lots of different types of cells. And then that results then finally in those permanent changes in the tissues. All right, so one thing that people want to know is, can anything be done to fix the permanent tissue changes? And the answer is sometimes. However, it is not a permanent cure. So, and this is a newer field. There is some stuff happening. You guys may be familiar with this already, but just in case you aren't, I thought I'd throw this in. So this is a shamelessly stolen photo from the internet. This is from Dr. Wei-F Chen. He is a super microsurgeon. I'm gonna have his picture up here, I think, on the next slide. But you see on the left, they've got a person who has lymphedema in the arm, and they have gone in and they have actually done a couple of surgeries to reduce it. So what do you have to do to get it? There are 2 steps. The first step is you need to make some correction to the lymphatic impairment. And this is where the real cutting edge stuff is going on. So that's what he does for a living. The second step is, once you've gotten that surgery, then you get a specialized form of liposuction, and often that includes a skin removal of excess skin because it's stretched out so much. So this is Dr. Chen. He is the head of the regional microsurgery and super microsurgery at the Cleveland Clinic and the co-director at the Center for Lymphedema Research and Reconstruction. I've seen him speak and met him up in Boston at a lymphedema conference, and he's wonderful because he educates people like me on the things that he does. So that's where I have shamelessly stolen his photos, but he puts them out on the internet for us to learn, so I hope he forgives me. The things that he does, this is something called a lymphovenous anastomosis surgery. And you may have heard about this before. The first lymphovenous anastomoses that were done, they're also called LVAs, were not very successful. What they would do is they try and take lymphatic vessels. So you'll see where it says LV1, LV2, LV3. Those are lymphatic vessels, and they would join them to a vein. Well, veins are much higher pressure. And so what they didn't get right in the very first attempts at these surgeries was that they were trying to connect things that were too small to things that were too big, and the pressure was overwhelming it, and they would just fail outright. But what Dr. Chen is becoming very well renowned for is that he is developing new techniques to do these lymphovenous anastomoses that are much more successful. So he's joining multiple lymphatic vessels to veins and is able to have much higher success rates because he's trying out new stuff, and he does some of the coolest surgeries. They're just awesome. There are also things, the lymph node transfers, he tends to shy away from that. He thinks that the LVA is a better deal because he doesn't want to put people at risk. If you remove a lymph node from one place, you could cause lymphedema elsewhere. So this is now a possibility, and so these surgeries are improving. But that being said, not everybody is going to be a candidate for this. So in order to find out, can I get this kind of thing done, you have to go to somebody like him. There are a handful of these folks in the US. Dr. Nelligan is another one that I know of. He's about to retire, but he's up in Seattle, and I know he has partners. But what they do is they'll sit down and they will map out your lymphatic system, your arteries, and your veins. And you'll see that in that top photo there where they've drawn out a bunch of stuff, and then they will figure out a pathway for which they can make these new routings so that the lymphatic system is then dumping into the veins, in local areas. So you have to go to these surgeons to find out. You can't go to somebody like me. We don't know this information. We don't have the imaging capabilities. But for some people, this is an option. So once you get that done, then you go in for liposuction for lymphedema, but usually you have to wait for quite a while. So this is usually not done like one right behind the other. The lymphovenous anastomosis has to stabilize. You have to have some improvement in your limb. And then after that, once they declare you good, then you're a candidate for the liposuction to reduce the size of the limb. And I want to point out, though, that if you have all this done, this does not get you out of garment wear. You are still required to do all the same things you've done before. That's where they are. It's Dr. Chin's belief that that lymphedema is on the cusp of being a reversible disease, but they can't really quite yet declare it. But he is really getting to where he's starting to say, hey, this does not have to be a permanent thing. So he's somebody to watch. And I already said consult someone like him, but like I said, there are a handful of these folks in the country. So that concludes the presentation. I know that was a lot of information really fast. And so then if you guys have questions, let me know what I can answer, because I'm sure that that was like lightning speed. So I'm open.
So this is Veronica. I think I'm in, I know I'm in that far left, you know, the beginning stages and things like that. But my question is there some like, I know there's a, you know, certain foods eating follow an anti-inflammatory diet. Is that correct?
Correct.
But what about supplements or herbs or anything like that?
Okay, so it is out of my scope to prescribe those things, but I can tell you somebody that does make recommendations like that are available online. Her name is Dr. Karen Herbst, Herbst. That's Herbst. She is she's a researcher, and she specializes in lipedema, which is a fat disorder that is very similar in many ways to lymphedema. And if you're looking for things that can help in terms of herbs, you know, what can strengthen your vascular system. The vascular system includes, you know, arteries, veins, and lymphatics. So things that typically are good for your veins are typically good for your lymphatic system as well. So I would go and look up her stuff. I'll get in trouble if I actually make recommendations on that based on my licensure, though, but that's where you can find it.
Shannon, do you think it would be possible to stop the screen share so that during the discussion we could all see one another? No, I just thought it might be nice for everybody to see one another.
Well, if I can get a cursor, my cursor is invisible. Let's see. There we go. Oops. Sorry. And stop share. It double clicked on me.
There we go.
Better? Okay. Sorry about that. Other questions?
Hi, this is Jeannie.
Hi.
I actually had lymphedema 14 years ago when I was going through treatment. And I still have, you know, a bit of, you know, my arm is a bit larger on my right side. Not that bad, but I no longer wear the sleeve when I fly. I stopped doing that a few years ago. Do you suggest that I still should wear the sleeves when I fly?
I would recommend it, yes.
Okay.
The reason for that. So if you remember, you know, the cheeseburger pictures, right? And where I said that, you know, those little purple structures where the arteries connect to veins, the capillaries for the bloodstream. So there are forces that regulate how much fluid comes out. And one of those forces is atmospheric pressure. So when you go up, it's less pressure resisting. So just like a compression sleeve would be a resistive force, atmospheric pressure in and of itself does that same thing. So I would definitely wear it when you fly because it just helps to reinforce. You know, you may be at a stage where you're very fortunate and you don't have to wear it every day. I mean, every case is unique. But you know, when you go up in a plane, you're more likely to experience more swelling. So I definitely would wear it. And if you aren't wearing it because it's not comfortable, maybe it's time to get refitted, would be my suggestion.
Okay. I think that I just stopped wearing it because I felt like, oh, it's getting better. And it's been like so many years, but I really appreciate that answer. Thank
No
you.
problem. You're welcome.
So Shannon, one of the questions that I was wondering about, I, knock on wood, don't have any lymphedema as of yet, but definitely had some lymph nodes removed during my breast cancer journey. And I'm just wondering if you have any recommendations for preventative measures that might help people to mitigate developing some of those lymphedema side effects.
Right. Okay. And that's a hot topic of debate right now, actually. So, so my mother had breast cancer back in 1992, and she was told never use that arm for doing anything. Don't lift anything more than 5 pounds, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There are, lists upon lists of don't do's for people who have had lymph node surgery of any kind. And when I was at the lymphedema conference in Boston last fall, so it was this time last year, one of the major topics that was presented on was, risks and recommendations. And we had several researchers who got up and presented what they call metadata. Metadata is when you look at a number of different research papers and look at the findings as a whole, and then you present a recommendation based on a number of findings, not just one particular research group or paper. So what they found is that many of the current recommendations do not have any merit in terms of what research shows. So should you use a blood pressure cuff on that arm? Should you get a venous stick in that arm? Should you do this? Should you do that? And many of the things came back as, there's no evidence. The incidence of the onset of lymphedema for people who are at risk but do not yet have it is no higher for many of these recommendations. So here's what's going on in the debate with the official recommendations. What do we as therapists then turn around and say to people like you who are in this situation where, I don't want to get it? Well, if I turn around and say, you can use a blood pressure cuff on your arm and you get it, that was what caused it, right? In your mind, because you've heard it. So then you're like, oh, well, that therapist told me I didn't have to do that. So this is the conundrum that we face, because truly it could just onset from a bug bite. I mean, any trauma, what they did find, and what they said, here are absolute recommendations. Do not get in the hot tub. Do not injure the arm, meaning don't bring trauma to it. Don't fall over on your bike and land on that arm. Those kinds of things are no bueno for your at-risk limb. So, but they never did find any of the other things, like don't lift 5 pounds, don't exercise, and so exercise is one of the things that my mother was told, don't do this. In actual fact, and this again steps out of my scope of practice, right? So I can't really advise on exercise, but in general terms, so long as you are not going out and doing something very sudden, like, if you decide, hey, today I'm going to go lift fridges for a living, and this is not something that you've been doing, yeah, that could be trauma to your arm. That could be a very serious requirement where you strain muscle and there's a great deal of swelling that rushes in. That's not good. If you said, I want to deliver fridges for a living, is that a reasonable goal? Yes, it is. But you have to be guided by someone like who is a physical therapist and a lymphedema therapist. So slightly different than me in my certification and licensure. That person, you say, this is what I want to be able to do, get me there. And they will give you very gentle, incremental exercises that will not traumatize your arm, that will build muscle, and you will be able to lift a fridge, presuming that it is within your, general, ability. So yes, you can do those things. So as far as the recommendations that you're still going to find online, they're going to be the same things that you've been seeing all along. But there is a great deal of debate. But then, like I said, it comes back to, well, she said that I could use a blood pressure cuff. But that's where we are with it. So generally trauma and heat and infection are the things that you want to avoid. Those are the things where they're real sure that these cause problems.
So how about other things like saunas or steam rooms or those kinds of things? Stay all of it. Stay with them all.
Bad.
Okay.
Yeah, you should definitely avoid those things. Because going back to that cheeseburger example again, where you've got the capillaries and the sort of sprinkler hose effect, regulating the blood going through there are like sphincter type muscles that open and close and allow different amounts of blood to come through. Heat opens those sphincters, which allows more through. So it's the equivalent of you having a sprinkler hose attached to your house. And normally you've just got it kind of on a barely trickling. So you've got just a little water trickling out of the hose versus turning it up full blast and then it's spraying. So that's what heat does to it.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I have one question. Does lymphedema ever cause some joint pain? I've noticed occasionally I'll have some elbow pain, and I've really never had that before this, but it seems like in the last probably 3 months, I'm having it a little bit more.
Okay. So that's a good question. A lot of times, and this is another very confusing thing, when you read about lymphedema, it will often be described as a non-painful condition. But if you work with people who have lymphedema, you know that that's not always the case. There are people who do have pain. And, if you've ever had an injury where there's inflammation, as we talked about in the presentation, inflammation is part of lymphedema. So you very well could have inflamed joints from lymphedema. So it wouldn't be necessarily always the same thing as if you sprain that joint, but their inflammation can affect all the cells around it. So yes, lymphedema can be painful.
And Shannon, if that is the case, is there anything that can be done to sort of, work at reducing that pain rather than just, dealing with the symptom of it or,
Right.
taking anti-inflammatory or whatever? Is there anything that one can do to kind of reduce it over time?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So by going to people like me or doing your own self-lymphatic drainage, being consistent with wearing your compression, this helps to pull those proteins and pull that fluid and out of that area. And therefore, we're also pulling out all of those things that are triggering the inflammatory response and getting them out of the way. And so it settles. So being very, very consistent with your therapy, self-care, and your compression are your best bets for doing that.
And Shannon, thank you for that. And then is it possible for you to maybe show us how we would do that on ourselves?
Sure. So let's see. Let me get rid of my necklace real quick. All right. So remember that the lymphatic system, it ends right here. So if you reach up, you've got a muscle right here, the sternocleidomastoid muscle, which stands up pretty tall on some people. And that intersects with your collarbone right here. And so this makes a little triangle right in this area. So you're below the sternocleidomastoid and above the collarbone, okay? So it doesn't matter if you're not dead on it, but that's where you're aiming for. What I tell people is take 3 fingers like the Girl Scout pledge and place them flat. I'm not poking in, I'm just placing them flat against the surface. And then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna pull in the direction of that same elbow. And so I'm gonna pretend I'm a gecko and I'm gonna stick to the skin, all right? And I'm gonna pull just as far as my skin will go, and mine's pretty tight, it's not going very far. And I hold for like a count of 2 and I let go. I'm still sticking to my skin, but I'm not pushing back, that's important. So, and then you just repeat this process. Pull, hold, the hold's really important, and then you let go. And you can repeat this over and over and over, like do it 20, 30 times. A good indication that you're getting a really good result. It doesn't happen in everybody from just doing that, but if you start to notice you're building up a lot of saliva in your mouth and you start to swallow, then you're real sure it's working, because what you're doing is you're creating a vacuum, which is also pulling all the lymph out of your head. And so it starts to produce saliva in your mouth. So this is step one. The next thing you're going to do, and you would do this incidentally, I should point out, I just picked a random side. You're aiming at the side wherever, since we're all dealing with breast cancer in this group, right? So you're going to be dealing with one arm or the other. This is going to be on the side of the affected arm. So I'm in this case using my left arm here. So this is my affected arm here. So I'm working on this side of my neck. I neglected to say that. So that's step one. Clear this area, and it's just repeated over and over, stretching in there. If you've got really, really tight skin like me, you can take your fingers and kind of mash around and loosen things up a little bit and then go back and pull. So, you know, I mean, feel free to play around with it and just kind of loosen up the area. All right, next place you're going to be is you're going to be on the underarm of the affected limb, and you're going to be scooping in, you know, and you're going to apply a little pressure here. You're going to imagine there are grapes in here. All right, and you're going to squish those grapes like you want to get the juice out of them, but you don't want to obliterate them, right? You just want to squish out the juice. And you're going to do this, I don't know, a minute or two, and you're going to get that cleared out. All right, once you have this cleared, then you're going to go to the arm. The main, let me try and get this, see my arm a little bit better. The main area of lymphatic flow is on the sort of inside part of the arm, not as much on the outside. I mean, it's everywhere, but we're really focused on the inside part, okay? All right, this is gonna be a little confusing, so bear with me. We are always going in the direction of the body, right? But we're gonna start closest to the body. So let's say my swelling is really bad in my hand, but not up here, right? But I have to start here because there's a traffic jam going on, right? If I try and route all the lymph up to here, but there's a traffic jam, it's not going to get anywhere. So I have to start in this area and work my way down the arm. So this is the pattern, but I'm always pushing towards my body because that's the direction I want the lymph to flow. So what you do, however you can grab, you know, and it's awkward for everybody. Self-lymphatic drainage is not the easiest thing in the world. You're just going to grab some skin and you're going to pull. You're not doing this, right? So if you're gliding over the skin, that's not it. You're pulling that skin. So if you've got a mole or something, you know, like there's a, I don't know if you guys can see a mole. Can you guys see it? That one right there? No? I don't know, so it should move. So I don't know if it's visible or not, but it should move. So the skin has to move. So we pull, and it's like that same pull, hold, pull, hold, pull, hold. And when you've done it, I don't know, 5, 10 times, move a few inches. Pull, hold, pull, hold, pull, hold. Do it for, you know, 5 or 10 times, keep going down. Pull, hold, pull, hold, pull, hold. And then when you get to the elbow, I'm going to bend so I can get in there because it's hard to push against the flat elbow. And there are lymph nodes in your elbow too. So go back to that mashing grapes technique that we did under the arms, and you can mash them. And you do that just a few times. When you're done with that, then you head back to the arm again and you keep pulling. And it's the pull, hold, all the way down. So I'm gonna speed up a little bit for time's sake. All right, now let's talk about the hand. The hand's different. So the hand doesn't drain on the palm down this way. It drains around the backside and then up the arm. So if you're trying to drain your hand, you want to push it around the back like that, or pull it around this way. It's kind of hard to grab and hold skin on the palm. And then if you're kind of like right underneath the fingers, you pull up in between the fingers. So you've got to get that fluid to the back of the hand. It's kind of bizarre. This is how you do the palm. All right. And once we've cleared all this, then you can move to the fingers. The fingers, you just are going to pull down towards the hand on all of them. But remember, we've got to clear. I'm going to take this finger as an example here. So we've got to clear this area before we can get to the tip. So we start here and we pull down towards the hand. And I'm just going to work all the way around that finger. And then we go up to the next segment and I'll pull down. I'm just going to kind of move my fingers around like that. And then you can even get to the tip. And sometimes you're just working barely. But you do that for each and every one of your fingers. So now we've worked all the way from the shoulder down to the tip of the finger. And you can do all that then in reverse. So then you go back to the palm of the hand and you do some of this. And then since we've moved a bunch of the fluid here, we can pull and pull and pull and pull. And I would be repeating these steps, several times, like, 5, 6 of these, etc. So that's the main pathway. But you might have fluid on the back of your arm too. So usually what I do, my personal preference, because these are the main vessels going up the, the inside of the arm, is I clear this path really, really well. And then, like, let's say we're going to do the back of the arm now. So you can take your hand and you want to pull it like up and around. So you're going to actually kind of wrap it around this way. And the shoulder, if you find, so there's different anatomy in people in the shoulder. Some people's shoulders go up into the neck. And there's no way to know except you figure out which one works best for you. But some people's lymphatic vessels go straight up and some of them go more around. So try both, figure out which way feels better. So some people go straight up for the back of the arm. And if you feel like, hey, that's not doing anything, try and pull around to the armpit. And then you kind of work your way down all the way around the arm. And then periodically, since you're pushing it around to the front, don't forget you've got to move it back to the armpit. So then you get back to the elbow and you just kind of keep going, you keep going down the arm, but you're always pulling in the direction of the body that you want the fluid to go. And that's pretty much how you do the arm. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that was super helpful. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Other questions?
Does it help to drink a lot of, stay hydrated? I'm sure it does, but I mean, like how hydrated?
So that's a great question. So it's a common myth that the more fluid you drink, the more you're going to swell. So in fact, for your kidneys to be able to pee out the fluid, you need to give them permission to do so. You have these little receptors in your kidneys, and what they do, they're called mechanoreceptors. They measure pressure. And so they're measuring your blood pressure. When you're dehydrated, your blood pressure typically is lower, and your kidneys are like, well, we can't pee out any water because there's not enough pressure to begin with. So if you're, consuming good amounts of, water, fluid that's not, caffeine or alcohol or something like that, then the kidneys are like, hey, there's excess. We're going to help, get this out. Not only is it getting out fluid, but it is also getting out waste and all these other things. And if you're doing your own self-lymphatic drainage, if you're wearing your compression sleeve, that's doing a type of lymphatic drainage, because when you move against that compression, it's tugging on the skin just like we were doing. So, it's still moving out this waste and fluid and everything like that. So consuming water actually will help to move the fluid out. And there are more physiological processes that are even more complicated, more than I can do like right now, but that if you don't drink water, it can actually make you swell worse. So yeah, definitely drink your water. Good question. Other questions?
So, Shannon, if nobody has any other questions, I just wanted to thank you so much for sharing your time and expertise with us tonight. This is a really wonderful lecture, and I know I certainly learned a lot. So thank you.
Excellent. You're most welcome. Thank you guys for having me. I appreciate the opportunity.
One more question. Is there any literature, a book or something on like the a diet that, you know, what foods are good to eat and what foods to avoid, that sort of thing?
Yes. There is a book called the Lymphedema and Lipedema. So lipedema is spelled Lipedema. So lymphedema and lipedema nutrition guide, I believe is the proper title. And there are a number of authors, Dr. Karen Herbst, that I gave you her name earlier, Herbst is one of them, and Chuck Ehrlich, Ehrlic, I think is how you spell his name. But anyway, there are about 4 or 5 authors. And what they have come up with in this particular book is they talk about the foods that typically produce more lymph in the body. So they are recommending things that are going to produce less lymph, and don't make me name them off the top of my head because I don't have to follow the diets. I don't know. I usually just tell people go get the book. It's out of my scope to tell people what to eat. Anyway, they tell you that, and then also anti-inflammatory things. So they'll say, like fried foods are bad for you because they're inflammatory. And, once you've got inflammation in your body in one place, you don't want to add to it with your diet. So it'll just kind of make it worse. So, but that's a great resource. And you can probably find it on thriftbooks.com, THRIFT books.com. And you can get things for pretty cheap.
Shannon, I just put it in our cart. We have a lending library at Pink Warrior House. So I just added that title to my checkout. Are there any other lymphedema books that you would recommend us having for Pink Warrior House in our lending library?
I would have to think about it. That's the one that I usually recommend to people. And my website's got a lot of information on it. So you could always put a link there if you'd like.
Okay.
It's haltmyswelling.com. So halt, HALTMY swelling.com. And if you go to the learn button on there, then there is a ton of information.
Okay, great. Thank you. That's really helpful.
You're welcome. And there are books on there actually too. So books and articles and research articles and all kinds of stuff is there. So that might be the best place, because that's where I would honestly go and look as a cheat sheet, because I forget titles of books. So. Any other questions from anybody?
Antoinette, honey, your sound is not working. We can't hear you. Oh, now you're muted.
I can see your lips moving, but I can't hear you. No. Is there a chat box you could type a question into?
Yes.
How about there?
Oh,
There you are. Yay.
Oh, you can hear me. Good.
I can hear you now.
So I jumped on a little late, and so my radiation, I had surgery. Well, I actually finished chemo April 10th.
Okay.
And then I had surgery, and then I finished radiation August 4th.
Okay.
And so I've been recovering, but I've been working out with the personal trainer.
Okay.
And I feel like I'm doing pretty good with that. Do you think it's too soon for me to be doing that?
So, you know, one thing I would ask is the personal trainer, does this person have any experience with lymphedema?
I'm not sure. I think he does. I mean, he modifies my workout. It's not like heavy weights or anything, but I'm doing stretching. I'm lifting like 5-pound weights. I'm doing like stretching and push-ups,
Right. So,
but not like the regular push-ups.
right. So, I don't know when you popped on, but so it's out of my scope to recommend specific exercise stuff. But my caution would be, and this may be a great personal trainer, but my caution would be if they are not familiar with lymphedema, like they don't have a certification in that, this would not be my go-to person initially. I would go to a physical therapist who is also a certified lymphedema therapist. I do know of a couple, there's like, I think it's physical and occupational therapy. There's a place in Bosque Farms called Living Waters Physical Therapy. And I know that's a little bit of a drive. And they could guide you and make sure that you're not overdoing initially. So that's where I would start. Get cleared from them, get cleared up to a certain weight and amount of, you know, time to work out, et cetera, to make sure you're not putting yourself at higher risk. And once you've cleared through them and they're like, we feel good to release you and you know kind of how to increment safely, then go back to that personal trainer is what I would say.
Okay.
Make sure
I did talk to my oncologist. She did.
Okay.
I saw her on Monday.
Mm-hmm.
I did see my breast surgeon. And so they both said that I looked okay and that my arm and my chest looked fine.
Okay.
And they said it was okay, but then I don't know. I just don't want to aggravate and add more inflammation. So I think I know exactly what place you're talking about.
Okay.
The Living Water. So I'll give them a call tomorrow and set up an appointment just to meet with them and get a second opinion.
Yeah, and they may say, hey, if you were doing this much before surgery, you're good to go. That may be their opinion. But like I said, that's not my area. So, but I would go to them and just pay them for, you know, a visit. And I think they take insurance there too, which is nice. So, you know, just let them kind of give you the once over and make sure that you're doing a safe amount. Like I said, I can't give an opinion specifically, but that would be the safe thing to do.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And Shannon, just real quickly before we wrap up here, can you share the name of your business again in case anybody wanted? Oh, I'm sorry, my battery's going a little bit low.
That's okay.
Could you share the name of your company in case anybody wants to connect with you for more individual lymphedema work?
Sure. So my business is called Pain and Swelling Solutions, and I'm down in the Nob Hill area. My phone number is 505-554-5185. And my website again is HALT, that's HALT, swelling.com. And just a heads up, because of my licensure being massage therapy and not physical therapy or occupational therapy, I cannot take insurance. So I am all private pay. So just, you know, I love to see people, but I know that's often a limiting factor, just so that everybody, you know, has that information in advance. It's not my choice. It's the insurance companies think I don't know what I'm talking about. So anyway, but I would love to help anybody that's in need of it. Other questions?
No, you've been very informative, so I really appreciate having this presentation. So thank you.
Oh, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, Shannon. We really appreciate it.
You're most
Maybe
welcome.
you'll come back and visit us again sometime.
Wonderful. Just let me know what you want to know.
Fantastic. Thank you
Okay.
again.
Thanks. Have a good night.
Bye.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Bye, guys.